Okay, now it's recording.
So we're just going to do a little bit of review with blooms and then keep moving forward to wrap up those slides from last week. And in there, we're also going to do some rubric design and then some classifying assessments so that you can have a chance to say, oh yeah, this is how I might use this assessment for this purpose and for that purpose. So blooms is just really a way to say, what am I trying to get from my students? What kind of information? Do I want to know, do they just know information, right? Because then you're going to say, here, I'm going to ask them questions that are down here at this lower level of knowledge. Can they just regurgitate back to you? And sometimes you really want to know, do you know the information? Can you tell me that? At other times, you want them to do something with that information. So kind of mid-level is, can they take that information and apply it in a new situation? Okay? And so you may ask them to do something. I remember when I was in college taking a cell biology class, it's like, this professor had like the hardest test I had ever taken. And I was like, what is this? And once I started teaching, what I realized is that he was asking questions that were at this mid-level. Like, he didn't want us just to tell the information back to him. He wanted us to do something with that information. And a lot of times that can really tell you, do my students know something, right? Because if you can actually take a concept or a piece of information and apply it in something new, you have to really know it and understand it to get there. And then our highest level with synthesis and evaluation is then now you're maybe putting that piece of information together with some other piece of information, right? Or you're saying, I can evaluate that. I can like say a judgment of this works because of this, or I have a criticism of it because of this reason, because I know this. So when you're looking at assessing students, I always kind of keep blooms in the back of my mind as I really sit and say, what do I want from my students, right? And quite often, an easy way to create an assessment that looks at all of those pieces is say, oh, let me take some lower order, let me give some middle order, and I'm going to give some higher order questions. And sometimes people always think that the higher order is really hard, but for some students that's easier than trying to say, hey, I can just recall fact after fact after fact. So whether something's hard or easy is really relative to each student.
So if you're wanting to evaluate all three of those, would you suggest, like, for instance, like a test or like, some sort of assessment things like that? Would you want to evaluate them with the same amount of rank, I guess, or like weight?
I think that's up to you,
Okay.
right? If you wanted to weigh them all equally, that's totally fine. If you feel like, hey, yes, they are all equal, great. A lot of times, it's very common for people to say, oh, higher order because I think it's more difficult, I assign more weight to these pieces. And typically, the middle and higher order, someone's going to have to write or demonstrate something to a greater depth, so that it typically gets assigned more weight. Whereas with knowledge and comprehension, it can be like, here's one sentence or one word that replies to it. So it's really up to you how you might break it down. Okay. So, assessment versus evaluation. What do you think is the difference between these two?
So we talked about it a little bit last
Yeah,
time. And
go
so
ahead.
I have in
So
my
what do you
notes.
have? What do you have?
Assessment's more of measuring knowledge or skill, whereas evaluation is determining the quality of that. So one's more quantitative, assessment being quantitative, evaluation's more qualitative, getting feedback as opposed to like the number grade or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so here's exactly Nina's words that you guys wrote down. So when would you use an assessment and when would you use an evaluation?
Well, assessment is usually taken along the way, whereas an evaluation is overall, how did you change from the beginning to the end of the course, would be my evaluation.
Would there ever be a time that you might evaluate something in the middle?
Yeah, definitely.
Right, so
Especially
this
if
is
you
like,
feedback.
yeah, this is one thing that I think is really difficult about education, like when you really think about how do we educate people, is it's not dichotomous. It's like, oh, this way or this way, right? It's like there's lots of different continuums. It's like, well, what is your purpose and what you're doing? What do you want students to do? And that's what, has Mina ever talked to you about backwards design?
Oh, I think one of the forms of lesson plans we talked about was like, you use like, something about backwards design.
Yeah, so what do you think, if we're saying we're designing a class using backwards design, what do you think that would mean?
But you start with like the grade, you start with like the evaluation, you like start with like the grade group or something like that, and then work backwards on how to get people to that point.
Yes, right, so, with backwards design, you think, okay, here, what is it that I want people to know? What are the big concepts that they're supposed to walk out of this class with, or this workshop with, right? And then you think, how am I gonna know if they got there, right? So how would I evaluate that they get that? And then I'm actually gonna go and design, here's the little activities that we're gonna do along the way to get there, right? So that before you even design your activities or lectures or discussions that you're gonna have, you've already thought, this is how I'm going to assess people, right? So is it gonna be a test? Is it going to be a project, a paper, a poster? And you may say, here, along the way, I'm gonna evaluate progress. Or I may give like some little assessments along the way to help me to see if they're getting where I want them to go. And so with both of these, like using that backward design thinking, what do I want people to know, and then how will I know that they've gotten there, is really the idea behind good lesson design. So some different types of assessments. Okay. We might have authentic assessments. Did you guys do this part? You don't? Okay. I'm like, do you have this in your notes already? Okay, so an authentic assessment is performance-based, real-world or meaningful. So what do you think might be an example of an authentic assessment that you've ever done or you've seen done in other classes?
Poster presentations.
A lot of poster presentations. Marine biology class that I taught last spring, like the whole goal was they have to do a big poster that would say, here, I'm trying to get funding to do this project. Right? So, and the idea was that students could walk away, and if they were going on to graduate school, this was a class for juniors and seniors, if they went into graduate school, they might use this as a project proposal. So presentation and portfolios. What about traditional assessments? What's everybody's favorite traditional assessment?
Test.
Test, right? And when we say forced response assessment, what does that mean?
Right, where you don't even get to answer your own way.
Yeah. Fancy way to say multiple choice test, right? Fill in the blank, true, false. Fill in the blank, I guess you could put your own word in there, but there's usually like one word that's the correct word. Okay. Sometimes there might be what we call high stakes tests. Does anyone know any examples of high stakes tests?
Like an ACT?
Yeah.
Like standardized testing?
Right? Those would be considered high stakes tests because there's a consequence for that score. Right? You might think of any other high stakes tests.
Like the GRE.
Yeah.
The bar?
Like the final.
Dissertation. Yeah, your dissertation could be considered a high stakes like assessment, right?
Getting your driver's license.
Yeah, getting your driver's license can be high stakes, right? There's
Becoming
this
a
consequence with it.
Oh,
And so this is one of the things that I always see within higher education, right, is that if you're teaching a class and you say, we have a midterm and a final, those all of a sudden become really high stakes tests for students if their whole grade is based on those two assessments, right? And like that can, like for some students that have test anxiety, that can just cripple them within a class. So I'm gonna try to convince you should have multiple kinds of assessments throughout a course. And finally, the one that you had talked about previously was the concept inventory. I think the concept inventory you talked about was an ecology concept inventory. Is that right? I remember seeing like a picture in the slides of Darwin's finch's beaks.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And what was funny is like when I looked at that one, I was like, oh, when I took evolutionary ecology here, we actually used that concept inventory. That there was a grad student who gave us at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, just to see if anything had changed. Okay. And I will say I actually did worse on it the second time because I thought too deeply about the questions than I did the first time. I was like, oh. Well, sorry, I didn't make progress. I became too deep of a thinker to actually answer that. So I thought that was interesting. But it's one way, like the faculty who were teaching that class were using it to see were students actually learning something within their class. And typically, I can't imagine there's a class that you wouldn't learn something in, right? Especially at a grad level. So, but it was one way to have a measure that here's how students did. Okay, so performance versus understanding. Okay, so if you were saying here, how did someone perform on an assessment? What might be some things that you would look at? Yeah, right or wrong answer. Right, so you might have, like, here's an actual score of how they did. What would be a performance of how you're doing in school? Yeah, your grades, your GPA. So when we say, how did someone perform, we're basically saying, what score did they get? Another way to look at it, right, how are students, first-year students doing? Are they retained? Do those first-year students come back for a second year at the university level? Or do they, like, for your grad students, do they stay? Do they finish their degree? Is there persistence? Do they go through graduation? Right? And so universities look at that. They look at, you know, what's their retention rate of first-year students? What's their retention rate overall? What's their graduation rate overall? So you kind of say, here's how I'm performing. So what do you think understanding would be?
It's whether or not they actually truly get what the context is, or if they're just repeating back information. You can perform well without really understanding, and you can understand without performing well.
Great. Right? Were they able to take that knowledge they received and transfer it into new situations? Right? Were they able to put two things together? You know, like when you're sitting in a class and you're like, oh my God, this connects to that other class that I had. That's you showing understanding. Right? When you say, oh yeah, I can connect that. Like this morning on NPR I heard whatever. Right? And I can connect that to what I'm doing in this class. That's showing understanding. which ones do you think are easier to demonstrate to people? Yeah, performance is pretty easy, right? This is really quantitative, right? Yes, my students are doing great. Look at their overall average. Look at their scores on this, right? Whereas it's much more difficult to say, here, my students, I can demonstrate they have some understanding, right? So, you know, sometimes if you might say, here, I had them write this paper, right? Here's how they did on their papers, right? That was a persuasive argument where they had to demonstrate some type of understanding of the concept we were going over. So those can be more difficult. So trying to evaluate these, we do it in a couple different ways, right? So one way is we might provide some oral feedback, right? Just talking to the student. So have you ever seen a teacher who walks around and says, okay, have your stuff out, let me come look at it, and I talk to you about it right then and there, right? That is a type of assessment. You're providing oral feedback to someone. One of the digital tools that I've seen lately, haven't tried out yet, is being able to give oral feedback through the computer, right? So like people turn in their papers to you, instead of you having to mark things on the paper and write something, you could just give an audio file of feedback, right? So I was talking with Graham Pierce about this the other day, because he was like, I really want to try it. Have you seen any research? It's like, is it better? And I'm like, haven't seen any research. My husband has used it because for him, he has graduate students that he can give a lot more feedback if he can talk through what he wants to tell them versus if he has to write things down. So he said, yeah, it's just way easier. I can highlight something and then stick an audio file with it. So whether a student actually goes and listens to that.
Is there like a function in Word for that? Or
I don't know if there's one in Word. I'm trying to think of the program that I've
not
seen that
for
can do that.
I'm curious as to what, on what platform they're doing that on.
Yeah, I know, like, so one of the platforms I've used, which is, it's like how we have Canvas here at
Yeah.
a school district, we had another one called Ngrade.
Okay.
And so within that, if students submitted papers within that, there was
Neat.
an audio feedback function. I don't know if there's in Canvas, I
I know
haven't
cameras
explored.
will do videos, that you can turn in just the audio portion without the video portion, but I don't know how you would attach that.
That's like a
to
comment.
the
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I know, so like, I mean, like, to me, this is a fascinating piece, because you really can, like, give, I think, a lot more feedback. You can ask, so tell me about your thinking right here, because here's what I see, what I'm curious about, right? Which you're not gonna sit and write that on someone's paper, or even if like you're having to type all of that, right? That can be difficult.
I feel like I always like write in shorthand or something, you know, like when I'm giving feedback. So just the opportunity to speak in like a full train of thought.
Yeah. So lots of ways to give students oral feedback just by talking to them, right? Even like if you were having students working on a lab and you went around and you said, oh, tell me why you set this up this way, right? That's a form of listening to some oral feedback from them, right? Because then you can tell them, oh, have you thought about, right? That's making them think, right? And so telling them, yes, did I do it right? Do I need to make some little tweaks on something? So like, just keep talking with your students. The typical written feedback, right? And like, if you know Mina, like you get feedback on your papers and the whole thing looks red, and you just kind of go. Mina gives plenty of written feedback, and I've learned just to say acceptable.
Soul crushing.
I had a dream last night, I'm not kidding, that Mina like failed one of my assignments. And I woke up and was like, I'm going through. I've been having weird anxiety dreams lately, I guess. Yes, that's real.
You know. I do. I feel like sometimes when I've gotten papers back from you that this is what they look like. Like, oh no. When we wrote a paper together, I was just like, oh. She's like, no, really, I just cut and like moved things all around. That's why it looks so. Okay.
Wow, this sucks.
Yeah, no, it's always very good feedback.
Yeah, it's constructive.
Quite often,
Explain.
we might use just here's a checklist of something, right? So pretty common, I'm sorry you can't see this, this was like cut from a lab report, right? So if you have students doing a lab report, you go, oh, do you have like an introduction? Do you have a hypothesis? Do you have like, you know, things can be worth a certain amount of points, right? And so that's really just a checklist. You say, oh, your hypothesis is worth 5 points. Oh, look, you have it, it's fine, you got 5 points. This is actually a pretty common way of grading, right? But we're going to say there is a better way, right? And the better way is to use rubrics to accompany feedback. Has anyone ever heard of rubrics before? Yay! Okay, so then this will be like just review for you. You just got to go into your brain and pull out that information. So what I'm going to have you do, we're going to look at this rubric and talk with the people around you. So scooch over and join a group. And like, just list what are some things that you see in this rubric. Like talk about it with you. I know you may have to come up and see a little bit. I feel like this projector is just needing to turn down.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do that.
Oh man, they use a great font.
But I'm not wearing glasses. Yeah, it's just blurry.
I think it's really
Hi.
and it's not on the slides, or it's not called rubric one. Is it the rubric that's on?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, then
so
I
it's the
have that
rubric that's in the slides. It's just, I just don't think it's
Okay.
called rubric
No,
one.
it's not. That's okay. I have it right here. It's somehow even blurrier.
Is it really?
Oh my
gosh.
Very categorical.
How can you guys see this?
I know, I'm like, let me get even like closer.
Well, then I have, so you can see it's
Oh, maybe if we go to the site.
Almost like.
Try to like, oh yeah.
Here, you want to read it out to me?
Yeah.
So it's serc.carleton.edu/intro GL/assessment /field.
If you change the rubric from one, like the standard writing rubric from 1 to 4 to 1 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
And what determines like those standards? Is that a state
Plus.
standard? Or,
So
go to the link.
if it's like a standardized
So
test,
scroll down.
then whoever created the test,
And
there it
then,
is,
okay,
it goes
then
with
click on the
it,
PDF version.
just decided, here's
And
what,
your day will be.
there's no
I mean, even in
written,
that,
oh,
like,
this is how they're
Oh,
okay.
okay. Why is it common? Why is like the 1 to 6 rubric so common versus like this one's written?
I think some people like, so if you have more numbers, you can delineate a little bit more between each score, whereas if like you just have 4 or 3, then like, oh, well, it's not quite in the 2 category, but it's not quite up to the, it's like, it's not up to the 3, so can I give it a 2.5? And so people wanted room to do that.
I guess I
So-
can imagine like depending on the depth of like the assignment or whatever, like how much delineation is necessary. And then like, yeah, I feel like some things like it's like, oh, like is it 5% accuracy, 10% accuracy, 15% accuracy, and you
Right.
don't even have different 6 levels. I was thinking about that too, it is interesting,
Yeah.
because I feel like it would affect grading a lot,
Yeah.
but it could be relative to what you're grading.
So there's different movements to use what they call standards-based grading in some schools, which then everything's on a rubric.
Oh,
And so sometimes they use a rubric that's a 1 through 4, right? right? And so then people go, oh, well, a 4 is an A, a 3 is a B. It's like, no, that's not really the idea behind that. Like, the idea is that a 3 is like you met whatever the standard was, and then a 4 is you went above and beyond it. So people want to always equate them back to a letter grade, but they're really not supposed to be. They're not.
Oh, where's
International Baccalaureate programs, I think, use like a 1 through 6 in their middle years program, or and a 1 through 8.
Oh, interesting.
So,
I would have thought it would go the other way.
yeah.
So I liked
Yeah.
how,
It's not a high
are we typing in?
We got it in high quality.
Oh.
Are you guys ready to talk as a whole group? Okay, so, I mean, it seems like it. So, what are some things that you notice make up a rubric? What are the different parts of a rubric?
I like that the learning objectives are on it. It makes it very kind of transparent to the students what they're supposed to be accomplishing or what your intention was.
And then within like your number scale and your learning objectives, your wording's consistent, which I think helps students see like it's pretty easy to jump from one to the next as long as you hold on this. Like, for instance, with like the accuracy within 5% versus within 10%. If you wanna get like 3, just go to 10%, but if you wanna get like 1 point more, then you just have to make like that small change.
It's like precise wording.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it does show rules, like, you get narrower and narrower with showing the difference between understanding and performance. Because if you just do certain things, I know especially with some rubrics, this one isn't exactly the best example of that, but they're like, shows an understanding of the concept instead of just saying, uses these 3 words, you know?
Yeah, and like those are always difficult because you're like, well, what does that mean to demonstrate an understanding?
Right.
Right? So maybe there's like, but you're right, instead of just saying, hey, they use these words,
Yeah.
right?
You can check
That
it off and
doesn't
it gives you a
tell
tool.
you, like they may have used those words, but they may have used them incorrectly. So sometimes an understanding might be, uses these words in correct context.
Right, or
Right.
explain something
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, uses these words to explain whatever concept. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a different rubric, hopefully this one comes up more clearly, right? And so I want you, when we look at the next rubric, is try to think what's different.
So I know Nina is very big on giving the rubric to students prior to them submitting their assignment. So what is the argument for withholding the rubric?
There is no.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's a good, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, like I'm a total advocate for telling, like giving students the rubric ahead of time. And in fact, a lot of times creating the rubric with students. Right, I was observing in a class last week where students did a project where they kind of built their own ecosystem, right? And they had helped create, it was a 6th grade.
Oh, fun.
It was really cute. Like, and so they had people demonstrate all these different parts, yeah. And they, like, had this rubric, right, that said, okay, you had to have these different parts. You had to be able to show how different organisms interacted. You had to have primary producers and then, like, first and secondary consumers, and you had to show biotic and abiotic factors, right? And so they had all that within their rubric that said here were the different parts that you had to have. And when a student would ask, oh, well, do I have to do this? The teacher was able to say, well, go look at your rubric, right? Like, what kind of score do you want looking at your rubric? Do you want to get a 4, or are you okay with a 3? Right? And like then the student is really trying to, like the idea is like let the student take control of what they're doing. And yes, I am a proponent of giving students a rubric ahead of time because then they know what the standard is. Like here's what you have to do to get a high score.
Are there people that are explicitly against giving rubrics?
Yes.
Yeah.
The life series?
Yeah.
So.
And I don't understand why.
The life series again, or are you not allowed to give them?
What's weird is they have
I
two
don't
different
know.
rubrics. I don't know if they're still doing that. So when I taught it, they had like the rubric that you gave the students, and then your rubric was like more in depth and explicitly like, here's how you're grading people, and so they
Yeah,
had a
they don't-
rubric to like guide you.
They don't do that anymore, the
Yeah.
only thing different between like the TA rubric and the student rubric is like the point. review.
So they had,
But like the wording about like what we're expecting is the same, but yeah, we don't get it to the students in advance.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why.
yeah.
I think
Really
Eunice
interesting.
talked about it before a little bit, like sometimes if there's like this sense of like mysticism with like tests that we give, and it's almost like it's trying to trick, or like you're trying to look for knowledge in a way that's almost like more trying to trick the student rather than helping them get there. And I feel like that must be the mindset is, well, if we give it to them, then we're giving them the answer key essentially, like it's giving them too much, whereas they should know basically what we're looking. That's the only thing that I can think of, but yeah, I think that that's
Yeah.
something that needs to be dropped in education.
And so, yes, so there's like things like debates within education of how you do that. And I will say, like both Mina and I stand firm on the side, like, no, you should tell students, like, here's exactly what's expected of you.
And here's how I'm gonna
Because
tell
I'm gonna
you
help you
when I
get
want.
there,
Yeah.
right? You're starting over here, and I want you to be over here. And I see my role as someone to facilitate helping you get there, right? But if you don't know where here is, you don't know where you're going.
And if you don't provide a rubric, at least in my experience, it seems like as the grader, it's a lot
So
harder
much
too.
harder.
Because like, you're gonna have to give them so much more feedback since they were missing those
Yeah.
It's
components.
hard to be consistent too, I feel like, as a grader.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so here's the second rubric. So remember, like here we've got 4, 3, 2, 1, we have 3 categories. Okay. So what do we notice here? This one is
Yeah.
clear, thank goodness.
Yeah, this one's kind of more of the showing end, so it's just saying like, oh, here you just said these words versus here you use these words in a sentence that makes sense and convince me of your argument. And it's like a scale.
Could see though how it might be a little bit confusing to students because the points are not the same, as well as like, I guess personally really understand what this, like, is the conclusion you're wanting, within the conclusion you're putting evidence and reasoning?
Yes, my guess is this came from a lab report or some kind
So
of
it's just like a
scientific paper.
section of
Yeah,
the rubric.
that would be my guess. Since it's
Then
just the
whole list is
conclusion.
kinda like,
It's more vague.
Maybelline, what do you think?
Yeah, that's it, that's exactly what I was gonna say, like this statements, oh no, I just apologize, but the statements are very vague in the sense that it can be interpreted in a number of different ways, like what does sufficient
Yeah.
mean, what does provides reasoning, what sort of evidence, like how much evidence did you want, blah, blah, blah.
Tell part of the feedback that you have to give a teacher, I guess. That one for me wasn't enough for that reason, and you gave that reason when you give that feedback.
but that could also be kind of biased going back to like what might be sufficient for one student.
Exactly.
And like in
Maybe
two different
not
TAs
sufficient
are
for
using
another
this,
student.
they might interpret it differently, yeah.
And like if they're really succinct, but they're only within a page, you know, and that's sufficient or whatever, but then someone rambles for 10 pages and none of it makes sense. But then they're like, hey, I was in your page limit or whatever, like this is sufficient.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think that if one person turned in a paper, if 2 people graded it, we could end up with a different grade.
Totally.
And that's maybe not a bad thing, but also if you're trying to get consistent results across the board, it would be harder. But it's very constraining to try grading in other ones that don't have any interpretation either. Especially if you're like this is a good paper, but you weren't within like 7%, you're within 8%, so I have to give you this grade even though you did clearly understand it. I don't know, I like these ones have a little bit more like,
Kind of as a tangent, I know that this isn't necessarily related to this, but we talked about page numbers. What is, do you know what the arguments are for and against like setting they're very concise and write really well, then you can imagine something like, you know, a 3-page science paper. I mean, obviously your students are, maybe they prefer a lot of science paper, but contrast that against a very verbose essay that is 10 pages long, then how do you, is that comparable?
I think the minimum, so there's like page limitations and page minimums.
Yeah,
And
I think
the limitation makes more
better.
sense,
Yeah,
but
that
having
makes
a
it
minimum
worse.
makes sense.
I would agree with that. Like, it's really like, sometimes we equate this, the more pages you write, the more you must know.
I literally had a
It's
20
more
page
crafty
like
for us.
lab report,
Oh.
and it was painful to read through, especially if you have 48 and you're on your like 35th, and you're just like, I can't read 20 pages about E. coli
Yeah.
and cell transformation, I can't do it.
So I don't think, like, there isn't a really good argument to say, oh, this is how many pages something has to be, right? I think, like, if you're, like, I know people always wanna say, well, how much should I be writing? Like, giving a page minimum can say, oh, well, like, I think you could probably get enough good detail and write succinctly and do well in X number of pages, right? And, like, really, people usually give a maximum number,
Right.
just because they say, I can't read that. Right? Like, if you're saying, I have to read 30 papers, and they're all 20 pages, right? Like, you're reading 500 pages and getting feedback on 500 pages. That is a lot of
And that
work.
feedback's not gonna be as good.
Right.
Because you're probably just gonna skip it.
So, like, to me, that's the only argument for saying, you should be able to do this in under this many.
Well, and I think we really do connect like depth of asking to a page thing, so if you're saying, oh, I want you to tell me everything you know about evolution, but there's like one page, that makes, it's like a way to communicate, don't actually tell me everything you know about evolution, it's saying like, hit the big parts about what, but if you're saying like, no, I want like a 100-page paper, it's like, no, it's just, it's showing how, I think people use it as a way to gauge how in depth the person's actually asking for an answer.
So, here's a good question that associates with that. Should, like, in a rubric, should you put things like, here's how many pages your paper is, here's, you have all these parts.
I think that should be really simple description, not necessarily like in the rubric, because that's just taking like easy points out.
Well, then people start doing like 2.5 spacing and.
It becomes
Then
so
it's not one
confusing.
point
I think like what we were saying before, that makes sense to like get at the point of depth, but as far as taking off points for it, like that.
Yeah, it'll show in the rest of their
Overview.
assignment if they are
Exactly.
within page limit or, you know, your format guidelines, like, there's probably some mistakes that you could look over.
Yeah, so there's certain things that I think like just don't really belong in rubrics, right? And saying like, here, you like, you know, have certain number of pages, you have certain like size, margins, you use this font, you like, those aren't things that like should be a part of the grade. Like, you might say, here, if I'm trying to give people more points, hey, you followed some formatting procedure that you made up, I don't know, right? But it should never be worth like the same amount. And so earlier we had talked about, well, should everything be equally graded, right? And so this rubric is allowing you to say, no, all these 3 parts are not equal in weight, right? And so it is confusing to look at, but then you're also, it's like, okay, but what I really want you to work on is like having that reasoning piece solid. So you should make a claim, you should say here's the evidence for it, but this in the conclusion is what I think is really important, right? Whereas the one that we looked at previously, like things were all equal, right? So that is up to you as the designer of the rubric to say, yeah, are these things equal, right? And that's something you can also pose to your students. Are all these pieces equal? Like if we're saying, here, a lab report has to have these 5 parts, should all 5 parts have equal weight? Or are there some parts that don't need equal weight? Right, like the methods, if it's already printed in the lab book for them, did they have to really do that? Do you even really need to prove that, right? The other piece is notice that in this rubric, it put the highest number first.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. And that, when people first started making rubrics, they said, well, because, like, some books will say, well, because we read left to right, we put the highest number first. For me personally, I don't like this. I like the second way, that on this one, it started with the lowest number first and built up. Just because I like to see things built up. That's only a personal preference. Right? So that can be one of those things you do what works best for you. I've also seen rubrics where if I still wanted a nice box, but I didn't want to have to do these in each one, I might have, 4 or 5 boxes that say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these two would stop at the 2, and there'd be nothing in the 3 or 4 to show students, well, you can't get 3 or 4 points there. You can only get up to 2. So lots of different ways to use rubrics. Yeah. So, and like you said, you pointed out what makes something appropriate, inappropriate, sufficient, right? So really when writing rubrics, trying to not use such vague words. So what are some types of activities that you would use a rubric with?
Projects.
Yeah.
So like making your own ecosystem.
Yeah.
That's a really cool idea. Wait, did you do like the drawing and stuff, or were you like?
No, so like
system?
they were able, like they could design a whole made up one or just use something to design. And the one that was really cool is this student he loved Legos, right, 6th grader.
I mean,
And he used his Legos to design this ecosystem. He even had like little clear pieces were the carbon, and he showed carbon cycling. So he had like these flowers and trees, and carbon was coming off of them. And
A future ecologist.
he used like some blue Legos for the river to show that here was some water, and then like the little blue pieces would be like down at the bottom of the flower, because I couldn't do 3-dimensional roots in here. I didn't know how. Really cute.
That's cool.
Yes, he did. And it was pretty phenomenal. Like, and he had created like little Lego creatures. It was like, here are the ones that eat these, and he could show how the energy passed.
That's so
That's
fun.
fantastic.
So like, he totally got it, right? And so he loved building his own system. There was another girl who was like trying to do an ocean ecosystem diorama, and like she was like, I just didn't have enough time. She'd been ill and gone, and so she was like, I don't like it. I'm like, well, but what do you like about it? What can you show me? She goes, and she could list, here's all the things that I didn't put in there that I think should still be there. It was like one of those, you're like, oh my gosh, you totally understand the concepts. You just didn't have time to show that in
Yeah, so
what you were creating.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, how do you create that?
Yeah. I mean, because that's like the type of case of understanding type of form, where people like that do terribly on a quiz and then come in and talk to you about it, and they can talk you through the whole thing and you clearly get it, but then they mess up the performance part.
So what do you think? Like, if you're the person in charge, so you get to decide, it's not someone else telling you this is how you have to do it, what would you do?
I think,
Go ahead.
well, I think a lot of projects frequently all have 2 components to it. So you would have a presentation, but then you would also have grade something that goes along with it. So I think that's one way. If you had both components to the project, an explanation along with a visual, then you could, maybe they would lose some points on the visual, but in their write-up, you would see the knowledge there.
Any other thoughts?
I love
I think like if they take the initiative to come talk to you about it and kind of like explain why, then you should give them the benefit of the doubt and, maybe reevaluate how you're training them or something like that. But if they don't come and talk to you about it, then you're never gonna know, and so that just kind of has to
That's all you
happen.
have to really do.
Yeah.
I would say like open it up even for a resubmission and see if giving them just a little more time if they need it.
That's
Extend
an
deadline.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then they get a chance to relearn or,
Yeah.
yeah.
definitely just give them the exams, and then they're like, okay, next part, and we don't really.
Right, and that's that difference between here, like, here's an assessment, this is just it, versus here, like, I'm gonna give you some evaluation and feedback, and like, if you wanna go make changes, go make those changes. And like, sometimes we are constrained by time, right? Like, the end of the semester is coming and you have to put in that grade, right? But I've had students who, I'm like, yeah, I have to put in a grade, right? But there's always ways to go back and change that grade. Right, so if someone really wanted to do something.
I have a question about that from like a classroom management perspective. Like, how do you then explain that to the kids? Like, did the amazing Lego thing on time, demonstrating perfect understanding? Like, because I can see both sides where it's important. Like, I support all of the discussion we just had about like resubmission or set a time, whatever. But like, how do you keep it your classroom there and keep the kids that are getting things done on time motivated?
Well, I guess that's, if it's on time, it's just rewarding them for being good at time management, not rewarding them for being good at, or not rewarding them for, it's emphasizing that being able to do things on time is more important than being able to understand it more.
Yeah, if the goal's to learn, then that should be, I feel that way too, because like even like in this class, like Nina's very lax about assignments, and I like was turning all of mine in on time, and I was like, oh, she's just letting people turn them in whenever. It's like I felt that because I very much grew up in a grade-driven environment,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's somehow you have to communicate to the students that our goal here is to learn,
Yeah.
right? It's not, yeah.
And I think in this class it's easier, right, because we're all older
Graduate
and
students,
understand.
yeah.
Well, and it's
Whereas
not
like, if you have, even just undergrads,
Yeah, I was
right,
gonna say,
they
my
get
undergrads
panicked
complain
and
about-
stressed out about all these things, and even just like that small age difference or developmental difference, whatever you want to
If they
call
hear
it,
that
I
someone
think-
gets to make up a quiz and they don't for some reason, like,
Yeah.
that happens a lot.
Yeah.
I know, well, and that's one of the dilemmas I always had, like when someone came and talked to me, I'm like, I wanna, like, you've shown me some understanding, I would like to be able to add more points back because you've said, here, I do know these things, right? And then I think about, well, is there a shy student who didn't know to come and talk to me? So we try to be really open with students and say, hey, like, this is your grade, but if you have questions, or if you think, like, you know some more now and you wanna add to it, come talk to me. Like, so we're trying to, like, give that opportunity to everyone. And, like, if you see someone who, like, I really think they should be higher, like, even going and talking to them, say, hey, like, would you come and see me? Because I think, like, you have some more understanding, but you just weren't able to demonstrate it in this project. Would you come and talk to me soon? Right? And so when you can separate, like, using a rubric, you can kind of separate, did they get the concepts compared to did they demonstrate those, right? So on a rubric there, you can say, well, they didn't show it in their project, but when they came and talked to me.
So like a smaller amount of points could be awarded to like timeliness and those like more petty things. So
Yeah.
they still get the points
Yeah.
or whatever, but they're not so massive that
Yeah, like 5% of the
it
grade would be
outweighs
based off
the
of.
learning.
And you do have to go back, like, what is the goal? Like, is the goal to make sure they learn? Or is the goal to, like, meet deadlines?
Well, and I think it
And-
is important to
yeah.
like have people, like, maybe you could have like soft deadlines and hard, like you can have it, so in one of the classes that I've taught, you have the early turn-in, where you can turn it in, and then I grade it, and then there's a hard turn-in. And so a lot of people don't do the soft turn-in, they do the hard turn-in, but the people that do the soft turn-in get 100% because that gives them time, and we sit down and talk about it, and they can fix all the parts, and so that could work. And that's in a 200-person class, so that, but really banks on the fact that only 20 or 30 people are gonna take advantage of that, and if too many people did it.
Well, like, that just shows that you need responsibility, like, you can't,
Yeah.
and it teaches the kids to, like, speak up for themselves, because no one's
Yeah.
going to in the real world, like, and, I mean, the real work world, just reach out to you all the time, so like.
Yeah, so
I
it makes
feel
sense as
it's
like a
skill.
sixth grader to like reach out to them, but yeah,
Okay.
once you get to the undergraduate level, then it's like, I that's how I grade, like if they come to my office hours, like I'm totally willing to regrade their
Mhm.
quiz with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, most students that I say, I'll give you your credit if you come in during my office hours, most of them don't, and I agree
Yeah.
that at that point, it's
Well,
on them.
yeah, I feel like even for the younger, like, kids in sixth grade, like, why not learn that skill earlier? Like, yeah, it's so good to open it up.
I was afraid to talk to people until I was in college. I mean, yeah, just about until I was in
But like,
college,
what if you
so.
had the opportunity where your teacher was like, come and talk to you?
Oh, when they
instead
made
of the teacher being like, hey, you know, like,
It
screw
wouldn't
it.
have mattered.
Yeah, no,
I
I was
don't know.
very arrogant and like proud and, but also shy, so I don't know, it's hard.
No, and it is, it's like, it's a real dilemma, cause like, you have deadlines that you have to meet too, and so,
And you're
it,
doing
like,
like a million other things too.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, and there's sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, you're still talking about this, and we have moved on way past that, right, and so that's another thing, like, you just kinda have to think, like, for some people, they're really good at saying, nope, that was the cutoff, done, we're moving on, right, there's nothing you can do about it now, just please move forward.
Yeah, usually.
I'm not one of those people, because I'm like, I always want people to learn, but like sometimes you get to the end of the semester and you have to be, and you're just like, I'm really
Well, that's why
sorry.
you do
So-
like, yeah, you do like a soft, so what I've done is I say, if you problem you Accompany within 7 days of it being turned back, if you're coming to talk to me about quiz 2 and we're on quiz 10,
Yeah.
you come to talk to me while we're still in quiz 3.
So it is, I don't think there's any research that says this is what you should do, this is how it should be, right? Like that it's you personally, and like everyone always says, oh, but we have to be like totally equal across all of our classes, right? Well, equal isn't always equitable to everyone, and being equal doesn't always feel the same to everyone. And so, it's hard. And I know with like the Life 102, 103 cluster, that's really hard because that's a lot of people. Like you're trying to say, you know, we need to have some things that are consistent.
On your head, be consistent between.
But, yeah. But then it's also hard when you feel like, but I'm not being human doing this, right? I'm just being a horrible person.
So I'm curious what you did with the girls' project. What you
So like her teacher was the one who had to decide. And like, since they are in 6th grade, and part of the philosophy in middle schools here is that students have opportunities to improve each time. That, you know, she allowed, like she gave her more points for saying, here I demonstrated understanding, but I just wasn't able to perform it. Like, I wasn't able to demonstrate it in my project. So. Yeah. And so, like, yeah, so some of the, like, the hard part is, like, the philosophy in middle schools, they have like a standards-based grading, so it's either a 1 through 4, if you're in an IB school, it's 1 through 6, is that students can always try to improve to get higher, right? But then that means they're like constantly redoing, retaking things, and then when they get to the high school, many high school teachers have a philosophy of like, no, if you don't turn in on time, that's it. Right, and so it's hard for students to make that adjustment. So trying to teach students, like, you are your own student, but you also have to realize you have teachers, and your teachers will all be different, and so you have to know how you have to act in each different teacher's classroom. Which is, like, it can be really hard for some kids, like, this teacher did it this way, and that's what I like, that felt good to me. That's not what I do.
Which is also real life experience.
Yeah. And so since we're having great discussions, we're not going to get to the rubric design, but I will hand out the blank rubric that Nina had for you to do that.
There's a great
I know. And so you can see, like, you know, what Nina gave you starts with, like, here's what's the low end, building up. That just always, like, I I don't know, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that makes more sense to me than going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I don't know.
The only reason why I like it the other way is because to see what they're grading and then see right next to it the best. I'm
Yeah.
someone that likes to skip reading as much as I can, and so like I just wanna be like, oh, that's what I should do.
Right, so
Yeah.
then like you as a teacher would totally do that, and that is totally fine, right? And so that's like another skill that students have to learn is like, oh, well, sometimes I see it this way and sometimes I see it this way. They're both valid, like one's not better than the
Yeah.
other.
What about doing ones that are like 1, 3, 5, and that gives you fudge room for 2s and 4s?
Oh, instead of doing like half points, what you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
2.5.
I think people totally do that, and sometimes it's more so that, like that last score, if you had like 4 categories, you add it up and it's 20, and then all of a sudden, the one hard part with that, right, like so you have 4 categories and it goes, 1, 3, 5, if someone gets a 3, they've automatically lost 10%. Right, so it's always like, okay, so if you're going like for, like if you're adding the last columns up and saying, okay, this assignment, 8 points. Or if they're all equal, like this one, are you saying, hey, I'm gonna average what they got over the 3 categories and the highest you can get is a 4. Right, so then if you said, here they had a 4, a 3, and a 4, okay, well they have like a 3.8 as well. Right, out of 4. So it depends on what you want to do with that final score. And if you want to like do some half things with it. Okay. So, like when we looked at rubrics, right, so we can performance-based that, we can develop it, both the students and the teacher together. It can definitely increase your efficiency of grading. Because then instead of having to write everything, like you can just kind of circle pieces where something might be missing, right, or underlining. And it is nice because then multiple instructors can use the same tool. When AP tests get graded, and SAT tests, like ACT, it's all graded with rubrics, and there's usually multiple graders that read the same thing. I can't think of anything more torturous than to sit and just grade all day.
I loved writing those essays, I hope they had fun questions.
Yeah, like I'm totally for writing them, I would not they do some AP grading here at CSU, and so I've known teachers, and they get paid well for it. And I'm just like, that just sounds like, I do not want to spend 3 days in the summer
sounds
just
like a
reading
nightmare.
AP tests. Like, oh, that is not for me, don't hire me to do that.
Start sounding
You
the
know what
same.
tests we're talking about? AP is like in high school, you can do like college level classes, and you can take a test, it's like a standardized test. And it's like a calculus test, and I got a million numbers, so I got a
Great, environmental science.
Yeah, and then ACT and SAT are
Grading it this year.
tests that you take to pass.
Very likely may have read one of your essays.
ACT is more used throughout the country, SAT is more used most likely. But,
The SATs.
oh really? That's how I learned it. Yeah.
No, what is the
Just for like applying for schools,
The one in the ready.
it weighted higher on the That's what I.
Yeah.
And the ACT has a writing.
Both of them have.
Both of them have writing.
And they're just 2 competing companies.
Oh,
Yeah,
Right, and like
college
basically what those tests tell you is how well you will do your first year in school. Like it's not predicting that, oh, you will graduate, like you'll be awesome at it, like you'll like, it says, oh, this is how you'll do that first year. It doesn't say how you'll do.
It's just like the potential to do well. in
Yeah.
college.
I think it's interesting how you can be good at the SAT and ACT.
Oh, I've never noticed that.
oh, my ACT score was way better than my SAT.
I got comparable scores.
It used to be SAT just had
I didn't know
the
that.
writing and math component. So like many years ago when I took it, that's all you could do. So ACT allowed you to do that science and social studies component in it as well. And so that was really the big difference between them. But now that SAT has all their subject area tests, like they both really do the same thing. They're just competing companies.
And then IB versus AP
IB, so International Baccalaureate, is a whole program. And so when students graduate, they have an endorsement on their diploma that says they were an International Baccalaureate student. And it's a worldwide program. So schools can apply to become IB schools, the teachers have very specific training.
Right, and it just means that you can apply to different colleges internationally, you know,
Yes.
all the things that you
Yeah.
needed.
So when you apply to colleges internationally, they know exactly, oh, here.
Whereas most only United States schools take AP credit?
I don't know, yes or no. I've
I
never.
mean, do
Yeah.
international.
So like AP or advanced placement is just like single classes. It's not a whole program of
Oh,
study.
and IB is.
IB is a whole program of study.
Okay.
That's your junior, senior year of high school.
And it counts towards college credit?
It can, yes.
But it mostly is saying that you can apply to international colleges.
Okay.
Because you've been.
Interesting.
So basically, like when you take the IB test at the end of the year, they're pretty equivalent to taking an AP test at the end of the year. And so then colleges will take your okay, so we had the parts and pieces of the rubric, that we had the elements, we had the whole matrix, that we weighted those different parts. And then you had those details within there, right? A check sheet is not a rubric, right? A check sheet without saying, this is what that means, like, you know, oh, here, your lab intro is worth 5 points, the hypothesis is worth 2 points, the purpose is worth the same, like, that's just a checklist. You're not saying, here, this is what here's the highest expectation of what it should say, versus, okay, now you're missing this, you might be missing this. Some people do try to say, here, no, this is my rubric, and hand you a checklist. And you should always say, no, this doesn't give the details of what, like, why would I take points off? Right, where would I do it? Alright, so then we said, no, it's your turn, but we're gonna move past that because we're running out of time. So some different types of assessments. You might have formal assessments, which are graded, and you might have informal assessments, right, which are not graded. Informal assessments tend to be very low stakes, whereas formal assessments tend to be high stakes, right? Because you're getting a grade on it, you're putting a number on it. We may also have formative and summative assessments. Formative assessments happen during instruction, and they give you, as the instructor or facilitator, information about how things are going, how well students are understanding what's happening. Whereas a summative is going to be at the end. So, easy ways to look at this, and once again, not very clear, but if a chef is making a soup, right, formative is the chef tasting the soup while making it. Oh, look, oh, it needs a little bit more salt. Oh, it needs a little bit more garlic, right? So you're like giving some evaluation about it. Whereas the summative is when you actually give it to your diners, right? And the diner says, oh, that's a fabulous soup. That tastes delicious. Or they might say, oh, that needs a little more pepper in it. Right? So they're saying, here, I'm going to mark you down a little. Right? Another way to look at it is your formative assessments build up to your summative assessment. Like I personally think when students are given a summative assessment, none of them should be surprised at how they did on it. Because if you've been helping them to build up to it, they should really know, like, oh yeah, now it's my turn to really show you what I know. I tried before, you gave me feedback, you gave me more feedback, and here's what I did. So, what we are going to do, and I realize now I did this differently, but we'll survive. Is we're going to go through, we can look in a couple magazines that, or I should call them journals because they're not really magazines. I don't know why you'd go through them for like entertainment and fun. There is the Journal of College Science Teaching, which is published by NSTA, which is the National Science Teachers Association, which is for K through 16 teachers. They have a huge conference every year. They hold regional conferences, they hold one large national conference, they hold a STEM conference in the summer. It is probably the largest organization that science teachers belong to, because it's very general big. They produce 4 different journals, one that's very specific to elementary teachers called Science and Children. They have Science Scope, which is their middle level, the Science Teacher, which is their high school level, and Journal of College Science Teaching, which is their highest level. They are peer-reviewed, but I don't believe they're indexed at all. And what they offer some little bits of research, but they offer a lot of, here are some activities or lessons that you might do in your class. So, for example, this one is talking about construction with scaffolds, helping community college students build explanations. So then it says, here's an activity you might do that would help your students build explanations. This one will range for all different content areas within science. American Biology Teacher is published by the National Association of Biology Teachers. Right? So biology teachers, basically high school and undergraduate level is where this is focused. Many of these biology teachers would probably also belong to NSTA, but they'd also belong to the biology teachers. So once again, also has lessons that you might use, and they would show you, here's like this one, has like, here's all the rubrics within it, right? So we did this activity, and here's the rubrics that I used. And so it's a way to share information that just gets peer reviewed. So you can look through those, but what I want us to be able to do, we only have like a couple minutes to do this, is think about what might be like some formal summative assessments that you would give, formal formative assessments, maybe? Like what are some things you might do? Whether it's, like, where would you put a poster presentation? Where would you put, like, here's a multiple choice test, right? Or have you ever had teachers say, hey, before you walk out the door, write down 2 things that you learned today? Where would you put those things? And if you want, come write up things on the board, or look at the magazines, whichever, whatever. Oh, but I know, you guys need to go.
Like your questions,
Yeah.
those are like formative and or they can be formal if you grade them, I guess.
Like in high school, did you ever have teachers say, here's your exit to get out the door? You have to do da-da-da-da before you leave.
I think I've had a couple of classes. Would those be like graded or would it be informal?
I've used things where I said, okay, tear off a half sheet of paper, or split one with the person next to you, and tell me one thing you're still confused about. hand that to me as you walk out the door. Because then that lets me know what do people not understand, and maybe I need to go back, address that the first time in the next class.
Oh, like at the end of a course.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay. That's like
even-
summative and formal, right?
It may even be like, here, you know, here's at the end of class today, right? And tell me like 2 things that were new today. Or tell me 2 things we learned today that you can connect to what we did last week. Right? And so that's telling me, are you getting the information I think I conveyed to you?
Yeah, well, actually, because it's graded, it's graded. Yes.
This is where we should practice.
Oh no, go ahead. I
It's
know,
about
we
pouring
totally ran out of
in
time.
the
You guys have had
classes.
such good discussion.
Feel exactly the kind of
This is what happens literally every.
I know.
I can just start yeah.
I used to do that right now, and just like
Went to a charter school.
obnoxious and talk too much. But
Do you know what happens at charter schools?
do you guys do standard testing in Italy at all different levels, or?
But the fact that they don't provide
Really?
for any of the students.
Because I know
was like,
in Missouri,
and I was like, and they have $500,
like
and they
like starting in the
choose
4th
not to talk
grade,
about
you take
evolution.
like
And he was like,
a test that everyone in the Midwest
And
I
they
can't believe I
have
sent my
certified
kids there.
Like we have schools that
Only
like
for
pride
maybe
themselves,
some
like, we don't have certified teachers. We have
specific
professionals in the field.
colleges.
Like so they have
courses
teachers who
where
have
maybe
never
they have
like learned about teaching.
maximum number
Right,
of
so
open
like
position.
when you've not learned
like
about teaching, what do
medicine,
you base your
kind of
Oh,
things.
so really competitive.
Yeah, and so maybe you add a starting test in which you get some grade and then you
Okay.
yeah, you can go inside the register or
Yeah.
your
Did you take any tests to come
So
here?
I was like,
No? Okay, because like we had to, like I had to take the GRE to get into graduate school here. And that's graduate.
I was like, I know
I mean, even for graduate school, it may depend on what the graduate school.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I know for undergrad you have to take like a language testing and it.
I was telling him like in the Midwest, we took a specific test like starting in 4th grade. Did you guys do
Yeah,
something?
CSAT.
Okay. See, ours is different.
Yeah, it changes and now it's not CSAT, now it's TSAT.
Yeah, I don't even know what ours is called, but yeah, and it's like I don't know. Why, I mean, I guess they do it to
I
get
have to
an
have
assessment
very
of where
mixed
children are across the country.
And it's
Emotions
where,
and
and it
feelings
makes
about
it, and that's how
Like I understand why they
like
started
teachers pay
as
make
like
up
a
after
Yes,
school.
it has nothing to do with the students learning, I feel like, except for them trying to meet certain national
versus saying
standards.
we're just gonna go.
But like as a kid, like I would get
Yeah.
these scores and
Thank you.
you're not really doing anything with
Thank
it.
you
But
all.
I did-
Sorry,
I
we
had to
totally
apply
ran
for
out of
this.
time for stuff.
So,
Yeah, well, and
My
then like,
apologies on that.
yeah, and then so then about like 5 or 6 years ago, so they changed something in Colorado so that there were like 5 or 6 different standardized tests. To the
Oh.
point